created the Office of a Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction to provide independent and objective oversight of Afghanistan reconstruction projects and activities. Under the authority of Section 1229 of National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2008, SIGAR conducts audits and investigations to promote efficiency and effectiveness of reconstruction programs and to detect and prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. John F. Sopko was sworn in as Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction on October 2, 2012, appointed by President Obama. SIGAR's Audits and Inspection Directorate conducts audits and inspection of reconstruction activities in Afghanistan. These audits are aimed at a wide range of programs and activities to fulfill SIGAR's legislative mandate. They identify problems associated with the United States reconstruction effort and make recommendations to improve efficiency and effectiveness. SIGAR's audits, instead, range from assessments of program direction to narrower examination of specific contracts or aspects of contract and program management. SIGAR's inspections are quick impact assessments to determine whether infrastructure projects have been properly constructed, are being used as intended, and can be sustained. SIGAR also conducts forensic reviews of reconstruction funds managed by the Department of Defense, Department of State, and the U.S. Agency for International Development. This forensic review identifies anomalies that may indicate fraud. SIGAR's investigations conducts criminal and civil investigation relating to programs and operations supported with U.S. reconstruction dollars. It prevents and detects waste, fraud, and abuse through criminal prosecutions, civil actions, forfeitures, monetary recoveries, and suspensions and debarments. SIGAR's special project team was created to examine emerging issues and deliver prompt, actionable reports to federal agency and the Congress. The team conducts a variety of assessments, producing reports on all facets of Afghanistan reconstruction, as the one we're about to discuss today. These reports cover a wide range of programs and activities to fulfill SIGAR's legislative mandate and protect taxpayers. The Directorate is made up of auditors, analysts, investigators, lawyers, subject matter experts, and other specialists who can quickly and jointly apply their expertise to emerging problems and questions. SIGAR's Lessons Learned program was created to identify and preserve lessons from the U.S. reconstruction experience in Afghanistan, and to make recommendations to Congress and executive agencies on ways to improve our efforts in current and future operations. The team's reports focus on key aspects of the reconstruction effort and document what the U.S. government sought to accomplish, assess what it achieved, and evaluate the degree to which these efforts helped the United States reach its strategic goals in Afghanistan. The Directorate is made up of subject matter experts with considerable experience working and living in Afghanistan, aided by a team of experienced research analysts. In producing its reports, the Lesson Learned program also uses the significant skills and experience found in SIGAR's audits, investigations, and research and analysis directorates, as well as the Office of the Special Projects. SIGAR submits a quarterly report to the Congress as required by its enabling legislation. The quarterly report to Congress is produced by SIGAR's Research and Analysis Directorate and summarizes all of SIGAR's audits and investigative activities. The report also provides an overview of reconstruction activities in Afghanistan and includes a detailed statement of all obligations, expenditures, and revenues associated with reconstructions. This was just to give everybody a brief introduction to the great work SIGAR is doing for the U.S. Talking about us, everybody please stand up. Major General Claudio Domizzi, Commandant of the Officers College, is entering the hall. Sì, sì, l'annuncio subito. Everybody, please take your seat. Major General Claudio Domizzi, Commandant of the Officers College, will now deliver his welcome address. Sir, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, ladies. It's with my utmost pleasure, also on behalf of my staff and of all our cadets, that I convey you my warmest welcome at the Carabinieri Officer College. A special acknowledgement goes to the influential lecturers and to all the authorities in attendance here today. It's indeed an honor and, first and foremost, an opportunity for the Carabinieri Officers College, the most prominent school of the Carabinieri Corps, to host this important event, which I learned it's attended by representatives from 15 different countries. But before giving the floor to our guest speakers, being the school's director, it's my duty to briefly introduce you to the college mission and activities. The college delivers both basic and advanced education to the Carabinieri officers throughout their career, including tailored courses to maintain a state-of-the-art knowledge and proficiency. Basic courses are focused on military education, law and law enforcement, relating topics with the aim to turn into junior officer, cadets coming from the military academy, and Carabinieri who won internal competition. Furthermore, we also form officers with technical, logistical and scientific profiles in healthcare, budget and finance matters, business and administration, and high-level forensics. Finally, we also provide our forest rangers officers with the necessary competencies in order to counter environmental criminal organizations. Being also the doctrinal hub for the Carabinieri Corps, the school publishes the Carabinieri's Review, our quarterly scientific and juridical magazine. Once again, welcome you all. I trust you will have a very fruitful working day. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now it's a turn for our director, Colonel de Magistris from the NATO Stability Policing Center of Excellence. He will deliver you his opening remarks. Sir, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Distinguished authorities, dear guests. First of all, let me convey to all of you the regards of the Carabinieri Deputy Commander, Lieutenant General Maurizio De Talmo Mezzavilla, one of the founding fathers of the multinational specialized unit, being the latter the precursor of stability policing. Unfortunately, a last-minute commitment did not allow him to join today's event. I would also like to express my gratitude to the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, Mr. John Sopko, and to Mr. James Jimmy Cunningham, the final curtain today, isn't it? For the trust on the Stability Policing Center of Excellence, one of the only 3 external entities that have ever contributed in their research efforts, together with the United Nations and the World Bank. A special thanks also goes to the Commandant of the Carabinieri Officer College, Major General Claudio Domizzi. Grazie di cuore, Signor Generale. Hosting us here in the Carabinieri Leading Training Center. I am particularly proud to introduce the presentation of this report focusing on the 20 years efforts of the international community aimed at improving policing in Afghanistan. In this regard, such a monumental endeavor offers me the opportunity to send a message specifically aimed at the junior officer sitting here today. The whole lesson learned process is to bear the utmost relevance in your professional life, since it provides you with a crucial tool that allows to continuously improve our organizations from inside and to transfer our learning from the past to the new generations. The Afghan experience has taught us a lot. The Carabinieri, as a component of the Italian defense joint effort operating within the complex Afghan scenario, played a role from the very beginning, focusing on capacity building activities in support of local police forces from the strategic to the tactical level. What we learned did not come from free, though. In fact, 53 members of the Italian armed forces lost their lives in the line of duty in Afghanistan, not to mention the numerous brothers and sisters in arms from Allied and Afghan forces who died defending the freedom and the democracy of that unfortunate war-torn country. I would like now to spare a thought for them and their beloved ones. Please stand up to join me for a minute of silence. I thank you. Please. It is now the time to ask ourselves, what can we do now and in the future to prepare our forces to better respond to current and emerging threats? I'm pretty confident that what we are going to hear in today's conference will help us to get the answer we need in order to quickly turn what we have identified as critical issues into points of strength. This will indeed allow us to better address the challenges looming at the Alliance horizon. The intricate and fluid international scenarios, the assertiveness of some international state and also non-state actors, the relevance of the new operation domain, cyber first, as well as of hybrid threats and asymmetric warfare, require a careful reflection on the need to sustain a shared strategy to support long-lasting stabilization of crisis area through credible and effective tools, immediately available to the international community. If they are not available, they are not relevant anymore, these tools. In this vein, NATO stability policing is indeed one of them, being a powerful and flexible tool which is aimed at upholding human rights and protect the population, whilst countering and defeating the threat to the alliance with policing rather than combat means. Switching to the event itself, I would like to start by dwelling on a crucial quote from the recently approved NATO strategic concept. It was approved at the end of last June. It reads as follows: building on the lesson learned over the past 3 decades, including through our operations in Afghanistan, we will continue to improve our readiness, our military and civilian capabilities, and civil and military planning and coordination. It is crucial to incorporate stability policing consideration in the NATO defense planning process. This is one of the main takeaways for today, I will say already. In light of this recommendation, which comes from the highest echelon of the alliance, you will concur with me that it is indeed a golden opportunity for our community of interest to get together today and discuss stability policing, greatly absent in the Afghan conundrum. However, we are not here to blame anyone. This will not be a blaming-storming conference. We are here to learn from the past and suggest possible solutions applicable in future similar scenarios to contribute to fostering long-term peace, stability, and development. Now a question to everyone. Were only tribal divisions and deep-rooted institutional corruption responsible for the Afghan security forces' collapse, or are there others to be singled out? Is it not true that since 2001, little or no consideration was given to robust police assets' role in Afghanistan? In such an unstable environment where the police was the most hated institution, wasn't it, James? How was it possible to delegate police tasks to ruthless tribal militias, armed and subsidized by the intervening countries? Rather than applying the stability policing model which, since 1998, the international community has adopted to respond to security needs of the population, so effective in the Balkans, in Iraq, and in East Timor. After all, wars are like natural disasters. They wipe away everything, leaving behind nothing but blood, instability, and chaos. And another query for you. Who is going to govern this chaos? Whilst the military deals with the enemy, it is crucial to counter those who benefit from havoc, the adversaries of the coalition, those who take advantage of the war crime overlap in the so-called grey zone, spoiling the peace process. In this vein, wouldn't it have been better to call for a mandate from the United Nations Security Council to deploy stability policing units to deal with this state of almost total anarchy, thus filling this security vacuum? Instead, Resolution 1386/2001, to support international efforts to eradicate terrorism, was based on 2 different criteria: the so-called life footprint approach and the lead nation system, the ownership. All our actions were aimed at empowering the locals with the ownership of the action to be taken. And another assumption, if I may, also a miscalculation. I mean, considering the fight against terrorism as an almost exclusively counterinsurgency military problem, rather than a social and a police-related one. As a form of organized crime that terrifies the population and destabilizes the rule of law, terrorism should be better addressed through both the radicalization and reintegration into the society, as well as by targeted investigation aimed at dismantling its structure, its network, as well as to dismantle also the sources of supplies and financing, the so-called Falcone method, follow the money. Indeed, terrorism becomes a military problem only as a last resort, when its threat is so imminent that it can only be neutralized by kinetic actions. In an unstable country like Afghanistan, where terrorism, insurgency, and organized crime were mingling and in unison subverting the foundation of the institutions, wouldn't it have been better to deploy a military force expressing also civil law enforcement capabilities? It could have been complemented or replaced the local police. Monitoring, intervening on corrupt and afflictive behaviors, providing services to the populace, thus filling the security gap, rather than leaving these tasks to the Afghan National Police, whose inefficiency, unfortunately, was very well known. There was, in fact, the need for an asset which was interoperable with both the military and the civil society, capable to calibrate different levels of force and seeking to reduce the risk of collateral damage to the local population as much as possible. That will have hampered the Taliban's narrative at its core. Winning hearts and minds of the local population is at all the gendarmerie type force and stability policing efforts. And now let me refer to something which really was very effective, and we have plenty of lessons learned about this. I'm talking about an asset like the multinational specialized unit, NATO stability policing forefather, a model now adopted by the major international organizations, albeit with different names and perspectives, but with similar functions, whose distinctive feature is the ability to carry out community-oriented policing to protect the civil population. Failing to immediately ensure the rule of law and guarantee public order and security, hence failing to seize the so-called critical golden hour, has meant failing to provide a timely and effective response to the needs of the population and to help legitimize local governments. Indeed, the Afghan National Police operated in a chaotic context, characterized by three judicial systems based on the Islamic law, Jirga Shura tribal system, and penal procedural law, poisoned by an infamous bribe and release culture. Never were the Afghan National Police dedicated to the protection of civilians, despite the German and Turkish reforms in the early 1990s, despite the Soviet domination ruling. Nevertheless, the efforts of the international community are focused on developing a paramilitary force to support counterinsurgency operations conducted by the Afghan army, rather than ensuring public order and security. Furthermore, the Afghan National Police, the most corrupt institution in the country, this is one of the main findings of the report that is going to be presented today, was characterized by endemic problems of discipline, transparency, nepotism, widespread drug use, and inconsistent command and control relationship, as well as frequent resort to torture and to the signing of written confession to obtain conviction in court. The deep gender inequalities that characterize Afghan National Police will deserve a separate chapter, and Mrs. Relene Fellin, the NATO Special Representative for the Women, Peace and Security, she is the NATO Secretary General Special Representative for this matter, will address this issue later on, albeit online. Strategically, the Afghan National Police were tasked to man checkpoints located at the margin, at the main cross points of Afghanistan. What an opportunity to be in the middle of nowhere and then to undisturbed prey upon travelers. They neglected the suburbs and remote villages, ultimately abandoned to themselves. Being the first to interact with the population, ensuring their security and basic needs, the police are the most visible expression of a government. However, if perceived as inefficient and predatory, they undermine the legitimacy of the central authorities. In the Afghan volatile and asymmetric scenario, stability policing could have indeed played a crucial role in preventing chaos and focusing on the protection of civilians, thus contributing to legitimizing the institution and paving the way for a progressive transition rather than a hurried retreat. Unfortunately, the international community did not seize this opportunity in Afghanistan, seeking the military defeat of the insurgents rather than promoting the rule of law. The latter, instead, mitigated their extremism, getting closer to the citizen, brutally turning their strategy against the Afghan security forces. Let me now conclude with a query. Maybe the rule of law should have overridden the rule of guns. Shouldn't it? I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, sir, for your speech. Now, all of us do remember what happened last year, especially the scenes at the Hamid Karzai International Airport. It is for me an honor and a pleasure to introduce the man behind the successful evacuation, our former ambassador Stefano Pontecorvo, last NATO senior civilian representative in Afghanistan. Please, sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I'll keep seated. Thank you very much. It's great to be back. I was on these chairs in 1978 when many of you weren't even born. You changed the chairs from there, and luckily also the chef in the restaurant. Also, if I remember, because I came here last week, and it was a lot better than I remembered. And I will also try to dispel the fear that what I always considered the ultimate act of masochism, which is giving a microphone to a diplomat. So I'll try to be very short. And I speak to my colleague Alessandro, who will speak later, who is the high priest of everything NATO in Italy, and who also has my same belief. So we're in luck today. So thank you very much, General Domizi, Inspector General John Sopko, Madam Gosbecker, Alessandro, Minister Catania, Colonel De Magistris, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to this workshop. I'm particularly happy to be here today for two reasons. First of all, because I believe that stability policing must be an important part of any crisis management concept that NATO or any other international actor pursues, especially in light of the Afghan experience. And second, because I will have a chance to hear firsthand Inspector General John Sopko, whose reports, insights, and analysis have been extremely important during my time in Kabul and have complemented very, very well what we saw on the ground, and that in the end contributed to bring the downfall of Afghanistan. I would encourage all of you, I've religiously read, and I'm not the only one of course, all of John and his team's reports. They are compulsory reading, I find, for anybody who deals with crisis management, especially the lessons learned report. You have everything that didn't go down well in Afghanistan. It's analyzed in detail and very credibly in these reports. They're really important readings for anybody who's in the field. I'd say essential readings. Given the time constraints, I will not attempt to go into in-depth analysis or technicalities which are best left to the experts, and I'm very much looking forward to listening to the discussion. I will limit myself to try to set the scene, focusing on the stability policing aspect by recounting the impressions of my time in Afghanistan, where I had effectively a privileged observation post. In a sense, the last year of the NATO presence in Afghanistan was particularly telling, as the Doha Agreement, signed between the US and the Taliban in February 2020, became the catalyst that brought to light all the weaknesses of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan that was surviving, notwithstanding its lack of popularity and credibility among the population, and was resisting the Taliban onslaught mainly thanks to external support by the US and NATO. One thing which people don't keep in mind is before the Doha Agreement, the Taliban had not won one single skirmish or confrontation with the Afghan security forces, let alone the NATO forces, the American forces. After the Doha Agreement, which changed radically the scene, the Taliban went on a rampage and then ended up in Kabul and took the town. I was in the airport at the time, as you kindly remembered, without firing a single shot and being invited to keep law and order by the former President Hamid Karzai. The Doha Agreement signaled the end of that external support, which marked the death bell for the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. The Republic fell for a variety of factors, not least of which was the corruption, which is so well documented in SIGAR's reporting throughout, which, combined with a fragmented political scenario, weak institutions, an unchecked insurgency, an unhealthy economic situation, and a president which was certainly not up to the situation, contributed to the disaster. Among the main factors that contributed to the fall of the Republic was the disaffection of the Afghans towards the Republic, which most of the population did not see as providing the basic security and well-being they had expected. This feeling, which was widespread and fueled by growing insecurity in the country, stemmed also from the failure of the Republic institutions, among which the police force at all levels, central and local. In a nutshell, it was inefficient, corrupt, and in some areas acted as a power of its own, alienating the population which feared the police rather than trusting it, as it was permanently harassed by those who were tasked to protect them. In all fairness, the police itself operated in difficult conditions with constraints and limits. For one, it was often used as a backup army in the fight against the Taliban and the various groups that proliferated in Afghanistan. It is not easy to keep law and order in a country mired by insecurity and which was coming out of a decades-long period of conflict. Especially toward the final years, in which the fight against the Taliban was intensifying, the police was increasingly used to maintain stability rather than law and order, and was one of the three forces, the other two being the army and the territorial forces of the intelligence, that provincial governors had at their disposal to confront the insurgency. This is exactly the essence of stability policing, ensuring security and stability together with law and order, but the conceptual framework and specific training was totally lacking in Afghanistan, notwithstanding the huge efforts that were made in different moments by different actors, the last of which was the Resolute Support Mission itself, and our German colleagues, which did a great job in what they were doing. They set up this academy in Mazar-e Sharif, that worked when there was an officer that worked well in Afghanistan, 99% he had come out of the German academy. Furthermore, the police forces, more than the intelligence and the army, were highly politicized and were seen by the central government rather as an instrument to control the provinces rather than to carry forward out the functions in favor of the population that was expected of them. In these conditions, the police had a very difficult job to do and a very limited capacity to perform. As I said before, this was also due to the lack of a clear concept of policing, let alone of stability policing within the Afghan context. This led to a proliferation of different police forces with overlapping mandates and different chains of command. At a certain point in time, 3 or 4 years ago, there were, at least on paper, 4 different police forces which were not necessarily dependent from the same institution, Ministry of Interior. Not to speak of the local militias, some of which had been created by the intelligence agency, and others that responded to local strongmen or warlords, and whose basic mandate was that of keeping law and order in competition with the national police in their constituencies whilst keeping an eye out for the insurgency. On its side, the international community put in quite an effort in standing up an efficient police force. From this point of view, there probably was a proliferation here too of actors that had initially put together a sensible work plan that, however, did not carry through. The European Union had made an attempt in 2014 to take over the whole policing section with an adequate amount of resources and a long-term plan to create a stable police force. It did not work, mainly because of corruption issues, and the EU retreated in good order. Individual coalition members stepped in, with Germany in the lead, that set up the excellent police academy in Mazar-e Sharif, and the rest of us, which I already touched upon, working mainly through the ANF Trust Fund, which was managed by my office, and dedicated some of its resources to funding police-related projects. It was around 800 million a year, I think, if I remember correctly. The salaries of the police were instead paid by UNDP, also through donor contributions. This is why I say that the police, together with a myriad of other Well, everything Afghanistan, actually, because the donors were securing between 75 and 80% of public funding in Afghanistan. The armed forces and police were 100% financed by us to the salaries. The Americans put in $3.2 billion, I think it was, a year. The rest of NATO put in $800 million, NATO and partners, $800 million. Still, we did not have the political will to have a real grasp on the situation. It was a difficult situation because it was a lose-lose situation anyway, because we didn't do anything, we didn't do much on the corruption side and on the direction side. And it went as it went. Had we done more, we probably would have ended up being accused of interfering in the internal management of Afghanistan. So it was anyway a lose-lose situation. Probably lost the most not doing anything. The policing sector suffered the same fate as the rest of the Afghan construction. The institutions that were built following the Bonn conference had little correspondence in the social sphere and did not resonate with the Afghans, which made it a weak construct. Rather than induced social change, it was an imposed social change. It didn't work. The Bonn conference was called and took place under exceptional circumstances, but it laid out, all too hastily, the foundations within which the stabilization and reconstruction programs, among which the police, were to be carried out. One redeeming feature of the conference was that Mr. Lakhdar Brahimi, the UN negotiator, managed to impose the idea of a light footprint by the international community, giving the Afghans a clear responsibility for managing their own affairs, which automatically defined the space in which the institutional advisors assisting the host nation were to operate. The outcome was less than satisfactory, not only because of the institutional setup which emerged from Bonn, but also because of the choice of the main figures of the Afghan leadership, all important in a fledgling democracy, and rampant corruption created the conditions for failure rather than success. Going forward, the problem with this setup, in which availability of resources was rarely an issue, was that it lacked an overarching concept and commitment to the police that was treated as a residual force. I believe that it was a big mistake to underestimate the role of policing in the day-to-day governing of the country, which we were helping to build at the time. Apart from all other considerations, such as the need to create a space in which local societies can prosper within a legitimate, regulated, and recognized framework, in a counterinsurgency, you need efficient police to control the territory. On all accounts, policing in Afghanistan did not live up to this either. I will not touch upon the women and peace and security issue, as Madame Verleen will do that, but thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, sir. Now, Minister Plenipotentiary Alessandro Cattaneo will take the floor as a representative of our foreign ministry. Please, sir.
Good morning, everybody. General Domizzi, Inspector General Mr. Sopko, Ambassador Pontecorvo, Colonel de Magistris, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me. I'm most grateful for this kind invitation to attend this important conference on behalf of the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, although it is really unfortunate for me to take the floor after Ambassador Pontecorvo trying to say something intelligent after him, whose competence on Afghanistan is unparalleled. And since we are commenting today and we are dwelling today on the most important SIGAR's report on policing conflict, allow me also to mention the last book by Ambassador Pontecorvo, L'ultimo aereo da Kabul, which I really do consider a must-read on Afghanistan. So the conversation we are having today is really of the utmost urgency. As allies, we need to draw the right lessons from our 20 years long shared commitment in Afghanistan. Within NATO, at Brussels HQ, a proper lessons learned process began just a few days, I would say, after the withdrawal of Allied troops from theater. And yet, such process, of course, has not to be considered as fully completed yet, as many aspects of our experience deserve to be thoroughly investigated. So the conversation of today certainly focuses on one of those aspects, namely police assistance, and very rightly so. Let me first of all, beginning by joining Colonel De Magistris in honoring all NATO servicemen, and among them certainly 53 Italians who paid the ultimate sacrifice in Afghanistan. In their memory too, I believe that we need to reflect on the results achieved through our common endeavor and their sacrifice, including in the police assistance domain. As a diplomat who tries to bring his own perspective into a military discourse and among military colleagues, I will not dare elaborating on the technical elements that will be touched upon today. Instead, allow me to dwell and to say something on the meaning of NATO's Afghan endeavor from a more political standpoint. Indeed, while from an operational point of view it is extremely important to reflect on what could have been done better, from a political angle there are a number of reasons to try and also offer a more positive assessment of our long and heavy commitment. First, because of the remarkable degree of unity and cohesion that was displayed by allies in the aftermath of 9/11, by the way, the first and only case in history where Article 5 of the Washington Treaty was invoked, and throughout the following 2 decades. The alliance has been able to forge a solid and credible image which remains very much relevant today as we navigate the uncharted waters of a more dangerous and complex global security environment. 20 years of cooperation among allies and our operational partners as well have allowed for unprecedented levels of interoperability. And this is also a result that should not be underestimated, since, as it has been reiterated in Madrid, in our new strategic concept that was mentioned a few minutes ago, crisis prevention and management, together with cooperative security, do remain 2 core tasks for the alliance, alongside with deterrence and defense. A second point, when we left Afghanistan in the summer of 2021, the country was certainly not the same that we entered into back in 2001. Much had been achieved, especially in terms of promotion of basic human rights, treatment of women and minorities, and so on. We do have concerns today. We have very serious concerns on the country's trajectory under the current de facto government that we have not recognized so far, as Italy, consistently with the EU, with the G7 and allies in NATO approach. That is the reason why we are favoring today any initiative, especially those managed by the UN, by their agencies, aimed at keeping and consolidating the results achieved along 20 years of international presence. But I believe it is fair to say that we have tried to plant the seeds, we have planted indeed the seeds for a better future to come. The international community should now focus on effectively using the instruments it has to make sure that, to the extent possible, certainly, those seeds are preserved and cultivated. Third, reflecting back on our original objectives, it is also important to note that we have been able to significantly degrade the terrorist threat emanating from that theater. Looking at the future, when we consider the evolution of the role and engagement of NATO in operations and missions, especially in particularly challenging and non-permissive security environments, the concept of stability policing is indeed of the utmost importance. In this regard, Italy can display an incredible asset with the extraordinary experience and professionalism of our Carabinieri. And I'm sure that the conversation of today will prove very worthy as an occasion to compare notes and to understand and learn from best practices on police assistance. We should aim at fine-tuning a shared doctrine, including within NATO, which would allow allied forces to seize, and if I can quote Colonel De Magistris, the golden hour after the beginning of any military operation, to bridge the public security gap, which is a void that needs to be filled. Otherwise, if left unattended, other actors, and namely spoilers of the peace process, like criminals, terrorists, non-state actors in general, will fill that void. As Italy, we believe in the great potential of an even deeper cooperation between NATO and the European Union. This is not a zero-sum game, quite the contrary. We need to invest in terms of strategic thinking and resources in the European defense, which should not duplicate the alliance, but rather should be developed in full complementarity with it. The time is certainly ripe to accept this challenge, which, as a result, will hugely increase the security of the Euro-Atlantic area and the political and military role of Europe as such, while always preserving the unity of intent and objectives among allies. Thanks again.
Thank you, sir. Now it's turn for Ms. Irene Fellin, who could not be present due to previous commitments, NATO Secretary General Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security. She was appointed to this role in November 2021. She is a women, peace and security expert and peace builder who has worked as a senior general advisor with Women in International Security in the International Affairs Institutes in Rome, NATO HQ in Brussels, as well as the international consultant for UN agencies and other national institutions for more than 15 years. She is a strong supporter of female leadership, and in 2016 she founded the Italian chapter of Women in International Security, an organization dedicated to advancing the leadership and professional development of women in the field of international peace, security and defense. Please.
Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I was very happy to receive the kind invitation by the NATO Stability Policing Center of Excellence and the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, and for the opportunity to address you all today. As NATO Secretary General Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security, I cannot start my message without briefly reflecting on our own experience in Afghanistan. For nearly 20 years, NATO was deployed to Afghanistan under a UN Security Council mandate. This mission came to an end last year, and NATO took significant lessons learned. Education, equality and freedom of expression are fundamental human rights, and access to education for Afghan girls and women had been one of the biggest achievements of grassroots advocates supported by NATO's engagement in the country. Following the Taliban takeover, NATO has suspended all support to Afghanistan as a partner, as the conditions for us to continue the investment in women empowerment has been stripped from us. While NATO as an institution is no longer present in Afghanistan, NATO allies, the 30 individual countries with 2 additional soon-to-be members making up the alliance, remain engaged. That is important and is a sign of national commitment to the Afghan people while still calling out for change. In my capacity as the Secretary General Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security, I remain firmly engaged, and where and whenever possible, I ensure that I use every platform available to me to continue to advocate and promote for the rights of Afghan women. In August 2021, more than 120,000 people were evacuated in the light early from Kabul airport as part of the coalition effort, including around 2,000 Afghans working for NATO and their families. By providing humanitarian support, helping throughout different voluntary or non-governmental organizations, individual allies continue to provide significant support and development aid to try to alleviate the humanitarian suffering. Allies are focused, allies are closely monitoring, and allies are calling on the Taliban government to make good on their promises. Not least so that Afghans who are working to uphold their human rights, including freedom of expression, equality, and the right of education for girls and women, can continue to do so. This would also help any future Afghan government adhere to Afghanistan's international obligations. And coming back to today's topic, policing conflict. Recent events in Ukraine illustrate how quickly stability can disappear. It also shows how difficult it is to reconstruct a viable police force in the aftermath of military operations, when homes, businesses, and critical infrastructure have been destroyed. Civilians, some of whom were police officers, have taken up arms and conditions are ripe for crime. Stability policing activities are conducted with the aim of establishing a safe and secure environment, restoring public order and security, and establishing the conditions for meeting longer-term needs. This, in turn, helps bring about good governance and development, particularly when done throughout security sector reform. It is about re-establishment and reinforcing the rule of law. Under a comprehensive approach, a combination of military and non-military actors, such as indigenous and international police forces, can achieve this goal. Specialized assets like the Carabinieri multinational specialized units fills a void by establishing and maintaining a safe and secure environment post-conflict, temporarily replacing or reinforcing local police forces. The strategic concept puts it very clearly. Human security, including the protection of civilians and civilian harm mitigation, is central to our approach to crisis prevention and management. We will work with other international actors to address the broader conditions fueling crisis and perceived instability and contribute to stabilization and reconstruction. NATO's policy on protection of civilians also underlines the importance of stability policing in protecting civilians from other actions, including with the use of military forces. Training of the local security forces, also throughout stability policing, is one important element of NATO's approach to protection of civilians. As we are witnessing the current developments, only 10 days ago with indiscriminate attacks on civilians in Ukraine, international humanitarian law and basic human rights are still not respected. The role of the police in building peace and preventing escalation or further conflict is becoming even more important. Such policing contributes to creating the space for people to meet, to again look at each other, to talk, to reconcile, to find and see justice, and enable peace throughout stability. NATO's approach to human security is founded on its three core values of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law. In projecting these values into crisis management, NATO aims, including throughout stability policing, at achieving long-term self-sustained peace, security, and stability. Thank you for your attention, with my best wishes for our fruitful conference.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're now kindly invited to reach the Officers College Square of Arms in front of the flags for a family picture. After that, please enjoy your coffee break in the library until 11:30, when the presentation of a report by Mr. John Sopko will begin. Thank you. For any issue, please refer to the NATO Stability Policing Center of Excellence personnel. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Colonel Dorin Luță from the Romanian Gendarmerie, and I work as Lessons Learned Branch Head in the NATO Stability Policing Center of Excellence. And it is my honor to open the second half of our conference by introducing our keynote speaker today, Mr. John Sopko. Mr. Sopko was sworn as Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction on 2nd of July 2012, and he was appointed on the post by President Obama. And under his leadership, SIGAR work has recovered or otherwise saved the US government almost 2.6 billion, secured 137 convictions, and produced over 500 reports until now. Mr. Sopko has more than 30 years of experience in oversight and investigation as prosecutor, congressional counselor, and senior federal government advisor. Mr. Sopko regularly travels to Afghanistan, where his office has the largest US audit and investigative presence. He has also delivered 90 speeches and testified in front of the United States Congress 17 times in his role as Special Inspector General. Mr. Sopko came to SIGAR from Akin Gum Strauss Hauer and Feld LLP, an international law firm headquartered in Washington, D.C., where he had been a partner since 2009 and co-leader of the firm's congressional investigative practice. Mr. Sopko's government experience includes over 20 years on Capitol Hill, where he held key positions in both the Senate and House of Representatives. He served on the staffs of the House Committee on Emergency and Commerce, the Select Committee on Homeland Security, and the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. Earlier in his career, Mr. Sopko served as state and federal prosecutor, as trial attorney within the U.S. Department of Justice Organized Crime and Racketeering Section. He conducted numerous long-term grand jury investigation and prosecutions against organized crime groups. Mr. Sopko began his professional career as a state prosecutor in Dayton, Ohio, with the Montgomery County's Prosecutor Office. He received his bachelor's degree from the University of Pennsylvania in 1974 and his law degree from Case Western University School of Law in 1977. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you for those kind comments, and thank you very much for inviting me to be with this esteemed panel and before this esteemed audience. Thank you very much. As I was listening to the conversations, particularly the kind comments from your ambassador and from your deputy in the foreign ministry, I realized I have a very difficult task ahead, but one that I've dealt with. It's the balancing test, and it's this report that we issue today is about balance. And in Italian, I believe it's balancea, is that it in Italian? You have to balance. I was trained as an advocate, an attorney. I'm used to being paid by the word. So I have to balance my natural inclination of speaking forever and ever and getting paid by the word, although I'm not getting paid by the word today, versus I also spent 15 years for working for Senator Sam Nunn, who I think many of you who are old enough remember. He was the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, spent a lot of time sending me to speak to audiences who were usually armed and dangerous, meaning they were soldiers and NATO soldiers and whatever. So I had to balance my interest and willingness to speak for a long time with my understanding that the people sitting in front of me were armed and dangerous and usually waiting for lunch. So that's what I'm faced with today in explaining to you this latest report, the 12th report that we have issued, and the only report that was actually done in conjunction with another government entity, in this case, this Center for Excellence that you've heard so much about. It is also of interest to me that today is the 5th anniversary of SIGAR's partnership with the NATO Stability Policing Center of Excellence. And it began right here in this building, as my colleague James Cunningham pointed out, over a, was it a long lunch or a rather short lunch? I think all lunches are great in Italy, but they are long. And I appreciate that. We all owe a great deal of thanks, and I in particular, for the excellent work done by the Center, but particularly by Colonel Giuseppe De Magistris, who is the director of the Center, and not just for his tireless leadership in organizing this conference, but also in working with us on doing this report. As I said, it's unique because of our 12 lessons learned reports, and I hope any of you who are interested in that will pick up this flyer, and you can link by the marvels of modern magic called the internet to all 12 reports, which cover 12 important issues that we thought United States Congress, that NATO and the Allies had to relearn because of problems that we saw in the 20 years in Afghanistan. I am pleased that our relationship with the Center continues and endures, thanks not only to the Colonel's efforts, but also to Brigadier General Andrea Paris, who was the former director of the Center. And also to the great efforts, and I have a lot of people I have to thank. I feel like I'm winning an Academy Award here, but there are so many people that made this report possible. Colonel Catalin Stegaroiu, Lieutenant Colonel David Eliaru, both who were former leads for this project and were critically important. So in general, rather than me drone on, let me just thank all of the individuals in the NATO Stability Policing Center of Excellence who helped us, as well as their colleagues in the European Gendarmerie Force Permanent Headquarters, the Italian Center for Excellence for Stability Police Units. They all contributed to this report. Now, I know some of you have met my deputy, Jean Aloise, who has been invited to speak a number of times here, as well as James Cunningham, who's sitting here today, who is the key author of this report. But I felt personally it was important that I come here today in Rome to formally release this report to the people who helped write it. And it is important to do it today at the Carabinieri Officers School to reinforce our partnership and to acknowledge the cooperation that all of those individuals, both current and former heads of the various units, in helping this report get out. Before I turn to the report, let me just briefly say a little bit about myself and my agency, which wasn't mentioned in the introduction. As he mentioned, I've been involved in law enforcement almost my entire career. I hate to date myself. That goes back to 1977 when I graduated from law school. I started as a state prosecutor in Ohio and later joined the U.S. Department of Justice Organized Crime and Racketeering section, which was really my first exposure to some of the procurators and some of the police in Italy who were working with our unit as well as with the FBI. I had the rare opportunity of leading the investigation and the first successful prosecution of an American mafia crime family using what's called RICO, Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organization Act, which was really one of the greatest tools the U.S. ever created for prosecuting the mafia. Between my career as a prosecutor and my subsequent decades working for Sam Nunn, working on the Hill and doing oversight, I thought I had experienced and witnessed everything imaginable dealing with organized crime and corruption. Then I went to Afghanistan. In 2008, my organization, the little organization with that tobacco-sounding acronym, SIGAR, not with a C, but with an S, was created in 2008 by Congress to combat waste, fraud, and abuse in our reconstruction efforts. Why? Because we were spending more money in little Afghanistan than we spent under the Marshall Plan to rebuild all of Europe after World War II, and money was going out like water coming out of a faucet. So that's why we were created at that time, and I forget what the exact number was at that time, but now it's up to $146 billion just for reconstruction. Warfighting I didn't look at. That was an additional $800 billion spent by the United States. And the dirty little secret, I will tell you, even though our embassy is shut down, our troops are gone, we are still spending close to $1 billion right now to help the Afghan people. So in 2012, I was selected by President Obama to head SIGAR, and I've continued in that role both under Presidents Trump and Biden. Like all federal inspectors general in the United States, I wear a law enforcement hat as well as an auditor's hat, and it's kind of unique. I don't think any other country has such a rare animal as we call independent inspectors general. So this means my staff has the ability not only to issue reports like this, but we've issued over 700 reports, letter reports or whatever, over the time there. Plus we also have the ability to arrest, to conduct searches, seizures, and forfeitures. To date, we have identified and saved almost $2.2 billion from our audit side, and we have conducted over 1,100 criminal investigations, which have produced over an additional $1.6 billion in savings to the taxpayer in recoveries, as well as we have convicted and sent to jail over 160 Americans. Many servicemen in the United States fell for the corrupting influence of all that money. Now, as critically important that work was, I really think the ultimate success of my agency, which I think will have the longest lasting legacy, are those lessons learned reports. It's often been said that we did not fight a 20-year war in Afghanistan. We fought 21-year wars, and that's because our civilian and military personnel rotated in and out of the country, sometimes as short as 6 months, sometimes as a year. We used to call it the annual lobotomy. I don't know how that translates into Italian, but we all know what okay, well, that's it. Because every year my people stayed for years on end. Every year we would see 70 to 80% of the military, 70 to 80% of our embassy staff disappear every June and July. And 70 to 80% of new, fresh faces would come in who wouldn't know an Afghan from a hole in a wall. And that was one of the serious problems. I was actually asked and encouraged by a number of former U.S. ambassadors and former senior generals to create a lessons learned program to try to immortalize the institutional memory which was disappearing every year. And that's what we did. And we've issued 12 reports on a number of subjects beyond just policing, on corruption, on planning, on elections, You name it, please go to that site. I think those are reports that anyone should read, whether you're working on issues of policing or you're working on issues of helping the poor Ukrainians in their task ahead. Because there is a similarity. Not one-to-one, but there are many problems that we identified in Afghanistan that I would say could... Whether you're working on issues of policing...
Apologies.
Oh, well, okay. Who is that man? Stop him. That could be relevant to what's happening or going to happen in Ukraine. Now, as I said, there are lessons to be learned and this report today in this conference on policing is actually one where we can learn a lot of lessons that can be applied. Experiences in places such as Afghanistan remind me and should remind all of you how difficult it is to reconstruct a viable police force in the aftermath of a military operation that has destroyed homes, businesses, and infrastructure, where civilians have taken up arms and conditions are ripe for criminal behavior. Now, while we all hope the terror in the Ukraine ends as quickly and positively as possible, we know that some of the hardest work will begin once the shooting stops. Unless we forget, it was less than a decade ago that Ukraine disbanded its entire police force due to persistent corruption issues and predatory behavior. My point is this: we must use what we learned from the experience in Afghanistan in future endeavors, wherever they are in the world, to build police forces in post-conflict environments. For nearly 20 years, the United States and the international community, as you've heard, provided assistance to the Afghan National Police, or ANP, with the goal of creating a legitimate, accountable, and effective civilian force that could protect the Afghans from criminals and uphold the rule of law. Now, without such civilian law enforcement, as our report indicates, the odds were greater that the country would remain unstable or revert back to active conflict, which it did. Now, yet, despite the time, effort, and money spent, except for some specialized police forces, community policing and law enforcement capabilities in Afghanistan were weak or non-existent. And that's after spending $21 billion just on the policing effort. Overall, as our report shows, the ANP proved incapable of enforcing the law, protecting Afghan citizens from criminals and attacks by the Taliban and the Islamic State, or ensuring that Afghanistan did not become another safe haven for terrorism. And as we all saw live on TV last year, the ANP quickly collapsed following the U.S. and NATO military withdrawal. One of our report's critical findings is the U.S. and the international partners failed to fully understand the history of policing in Afghanistan, which has never had an effective nationwide police force dedicated to protecting its citizens. Primarily, Afghan police over the centuries have existed only to protect government power, often through corrupt or abusive means. As one member of the ANP told Jim and told our staff, quote, "While the world knows how hated the Taliban had become by the time of the U.S. invasion in 2001, most forgot that all police forces before the Taliban had been similarly hated by the Afghan people." The U.S. and international community missed that opportunity when they came in the early days. It's called the golden hour. It's a matter of months to do something. The United States and the United Nations largely ignored the need to rapidly deploy police and rule of law advisors to stabilize what was, during that time, a post-conflict country. This was opposite to the approach taken in Kosovo just a few years before. Instead, in Afghanistan, the United States implemented the light footprint strategy of maintaining a small troop presence with international community following the U.S. lead. With the U.S. focused on pursuing al-Qaeda and Taliban sponsors, senior Afghan officials seized the opportunity to reestablish a police force beholden to them at the expense of the Afghan people. For decades, that newly constituted Afghan police force operated with almost total impunity. The Afghan government and the international community did not hold Afghan police officers, particularly those with political connections, accountable for numerous acts of corruption and human rights abuses. This rapidly eroded any hope the population may have had that the new Afghan government would serve the people. And the Taliban accordingly exploited that to reestablish themselves in Afghanistan. Now, the international community belatedly recognized the depleted state of the Afghan police and the need to increase international support. Germany took the lead. But by 2003, the Department of State created its own police reform program in Afghanistan. Even though establishing law and order in a post-conflict environment is critical, the U.S. and international community, unfortunately, do not have a deployable police assistance unit that has the required resources and required specialized skill. Although in the United States, the State Department is the lead U.S. agency for police assistance, it does not have a dedicated team of deployable...
I beg your pardon, sir. Please welcome the Carabinieri Deputy Commander, Lieutenant General Maurizio De Talmo Mezzavilla.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for coming. On this. Oh. Thank you, sir. Sorry.
It is a pleasure to have you present. Okay. What I was saying is that although the State Department is the lead agency for police assistance, as our report showed, it does not have a dedicated team of deployable police development experts, and in essence had to contract it all out. Unfortunately, there was very little oversight over that contract. From the start of the program at State Department struggled also, in no small part because the training program assumed that Afghanistan remained a post-conflict state and that they had years to implement a professional police training program. But as the Taliban regained strength, security, as we all know, deteriorated, and the freedom of movement by Department of State personnel, as well as their contractors, limited them to their bases, U.S. bases and coalition bases, and the Kabul embassy compound. The State Department also failed to implement the best practice, which I think many of you know is to embed experienced police advisors with newly trained officers to provide follow-up training in the field. In short, despite having the legal authority and the budget, the U.S. State Department was ill-prepared to operate in a high-threat environment like Afghanistan. Given this limitation, the U.S. Department of Defense began advocating to take over the police function. And the Defense Department made a compelling case, because at that time, the State Department had not provided basic items to the Afghan police, including uniforms, sleeping bags, weapons, as well as communications equipment. So by 2005, all police training and assistance was transferred from state to the Defense Department because they seemed better resourced for the mission. But as SIGAR has found repeatedly in Afghanistan, more resources do not lead to better results. And unfortunately, speaking as an American, it is an American proclivity that when there's a problem, the answer is pour more money into it. And unfortunately, we poured too much money, too fast, in too small a country with too little oversight. And that was the problem with the policing as well as with a lot of our other programs in Afghanistan. So despite a 2006 study by, I believe it was the Rand Corporation, looking at police training in Iraq, where it concluded the U.S. military was ill-equipped to train foreign police, the U.S. military rapidly deployed advisors to partner with the police and moved the embedded training teams from the military, Afghan military, to do training for the police. Because the Defense Department had more people, more money, and the ability to operate in non-permissive environments, the U.S. Police Assistance Mission, in effect, became an extension of the U.S. military training mission. But the lack of an institutionalized deployable police assistance unit continued to create challenges, as our report details in the historical part. Just because the Defense Department had more personnel and more money than the State Department did not mean the Defense Department had the right personnel. The police mentoring teams continued to be staffed mostly by soldiers who lacked a basic understanding of law enforcement community policing or criminal investigations. Rather, they had experience in infantry, combat aviation, or other military specializations. And I was talking to somebody here this week that we actually had evidence of submariners being sent to train police officers. Now, don't get me wrong. I do not mean to attack our military. They were trying their best. But these soldiers and sailors did not have the skill sets that many of you in the audience have. You would not identify them as the key teachers to build a civilian police force if you had the opportunity. Unbelievably, things were so bad that SIGAR actually found Black Hawk helicopter pilots and other soldiers, U.S. soldiers, using popular American TV shows as training materials. Now, as an aside, unfortunately, none of these soldiers used episodes of my favorite TV crime show, Montalbano, which is very popular. I think it's popular here in Italy still, but it's very popular in the United States. And if they had, at least they had used Montalbano, the Afghans would have learned something useful, something about the mafia and something about good Sicilian cooking. But they didn't. And while NATO, as you well know, has excellent expertise for the gendarmerie forces, but for most of the Afghan mission, NATO staffed roughly only 50% of the required police assistance assignments. And despite pleas from the U.S. military commanders for additional NATO support in the realm of police advisors, the international community continued to fall short on its pledges for more personnel. Compounding the problem we identified, at various points, U.S. police assistance prioritized rapidly increasing the quantity of Afghan police over the quality. And for example, we mandated that the Afghan government double the size of the police force from 60-some thousand to 120,000 police. As we eventually learned in this case, more does not equal better. All the while during this, the Taliban insurgency grew stronger. In response, the Defense Department's leadership, the mission, and focus of the Afghan police came to reflect the U.S. military's counterinsurgency strategy. Instead of focusing on rule of law, Community policing. Most Afghan units focus solely on security and support for the Afghan army. By focusing on the growing violence throughout the country, the Afghan police failed to develop the basic law enforcement capabilities required to prevent and respond to criminal activity that plagued the daily lives of the Afghan citizens. Even in areas of Afghanistan that were secure enough for civilian police presence. This, in turn, again, undermined the legitimacy of the central government and may have had and turned some Afghans toward traditional justice mechanisms, whether Taliban or tribal. I remember at a certain point, because I've been going to Afghanistan for 10 years, and it hit me at one time. Actually, it was a depressing moment, because I used to meet with a lot of Afghan civil society members and members of the Afghan government. And for some reason, that week or two I was there, I got into conversations with a lot of young, brave, honest Afghans. And every one of them, we got into a conversation of, your family lives out beyond Kabul. If you had to have justice, where would you go? And they would say, we would tell our parents to go to the Taliban. And at that point, this is 5 years ago, I kind of realized we had lost. Because if a young, Western-educated Afghan civil servant who's working for Ghani or working for the Minister of Interior or working on anti-corruption is basically saying, I don't trust the system, I would go to the Taliban, you're sort of saying we're doing something wrong in this country. So all of this, all these problems reinforce the Afghan people's belief that the police's long history of serving the powerful over the general population had not changed. So the widespread use in particular of illegal detention and torture of suspected insurgents, for example, led some communities, particularly over the last 2 or 3 years, to welcome back the Taliban as liberators, just as they did in the 1990s. So the U.S. military's approach to police training preserved Afghanistan's pervasive culture of police impunity by funding and providing technical assistance to Afghan police units that faced credible reports of committing gross human rights violations. And it does illustrate a key dilemma for U.S. advisors and NATO advisors. So the question is international cooperation with brutal but militarily capable security forces worthwhile if it restores security? Or did such cooperation create more conflict in the long run by undermining good governance and rule of law? Now, the collapse of the Afghan government and the Afghan security forces in August 2021 highlights the importance of establishing a trusted and effective police service in stabilizing post-conflict and fragile states. Countries that lack a trusted police service to enforce a nation's laws and protect its citizens risk instability and a reversion back to conflict. For the United States and the donor community, police assistance still remains a weak link in the development of a partner nation's security sector and rule of law. After 20 years and over $20 billion of U.S. provided assistance, the U.S. government failed to construct a capable Afghan national police force. As we know, the Taliban took control, and the current Minister of Interior is a Taliban member who's on the FBI's most wanted list, and the police in Afghanistan are currently whipping women in the streets and are suspected of extrajudicial killings of former Afghan government officials, journalists, and supporters of the government. As you will note, our report identifies 11 key findings, 10 key lessons, and 10 key recommendations. Obviously, I don't have the time because I know many of you are armed and you're waiting for lunch to go into all of those. I ask you to read the report or wait till the movie comes out. But the first thing I want to talk about, just one briefly, is that the U.S. and donor community lacks this expeditionary police assistance capability with enough qualified and trained police assistant experts required for most stabilization and reconstruction missions. That's one of our key findings. Foreign police assistance is often a civilian-led task, as I explained in Afghanistan. But civilian agencies lack the force protection and mobility to operate in areas of significant violence. And most civilian-led agencies do not have a cadre of experts on standby that can rapidly deploy. This often results, like in Afghanistan, where the military is asked to step in. Yet militaries usually also lack the technical expertise to develop a civilian police force and associated ministries. And since advisors are likely to train the police on what they know best, this increases the risk of an overly militarized police force. Our report also notes that the United States should consider using its relationships with allies who have unique police assistance capabilities, such as Italy with the internationally respected Carabinieri. In addition to Italy, a number of other European countries have police forces with military status, gendarmerie. Although gendarmerie provide a unique capability better suited for high-threat environments, they are also responsible for core police tasks in their home countries. Unfortunately, we recognize this also means that the supply of deployable cadres of advisors from gendarmerie forces will be limited. The UN, EU, and NATO have developed doctrine and policies for stability police tasks, tailored for post-conflict environments. Unfortunately, the report notes, the NATO stability police concept is stalled within NATO. And thus far, alliance members have not agreed to create this as a core capability within the NATO structure, despite a long and rich history of NATO being asked to perform these tasks. And these capabilities are widely unknown, and this is a point I want to make, are widely unknown to many military and civilian officials in the United States, which has contributed, I believe, personally, to this underutilization. We don't have an experience with a gendarmerie. We don't have an experience with something like the Italian Carabinieri. As a matter of fact, our history is to avoid anything that smacks of the military doing law enforcement. It's actually against the law in the United States. So a lot of the generals and a lot of people in Congress don't know about you. They don't know your capabilities. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here today. I hope this report will help alleviate this ignorance in my country and other NATO countries that don't know about your capabilities. The second key lesson of this report is that pre-deployment training and education for international police advisors should, I should say must, include an understanding of the host nation's legal traditions, historical relationship between police and population, the extent of police corruption, the command and control organization of the host nation's police forces, frameworks to hold police accountable to rule of law, and the host nation's policies and planning documents for police operations. The experience in Afghanistan makes clear that international advisors who are familiar with those concepts and practices in history will actually do a lot better and are equipped to advocate for training and reforms that align with the host nation's experience. This knowledge will also help advisors, particularly from interjecting police concepts that may run counter to the host nation's criminal justice system. As, for example, when U.S. advisors tried to import common law concepts to Afghanistan, where the legal system is based on civil law traditions intertwined with religious and customary law. Whatever policymakers say, whether in the United States or in Rome or in Brussels, it is highly likely that your country, the United States, NATO, the EU, and others in the international community will be called upon to undertake a police advising effort again in the future. I just want to remind you that. After Vietnam, in the United States, all of our policymakers in the Pentagon, State, and Aid said, we'll never do it again. Well, we did. We did in Iraq, we did in Afghanistan, and we're starting to do it in many other spots in the world. But if you don't prepare for it, you're not going to do a good job. And part of the preparation is learning lessons from Afghanistan and other countries. If we truly want a different outcome than that experience in Afghanistan, policymakers must learn from our 20-year experience there and make the hard choices necessary to invest in police assistance and undertake necessary reforms required to increase the odds. I'll end by saying Winston Churchill once said, "He who fails to plan is planning to fail." I personally believe now more than ever, after having spent 10 years in Afghanistan, now more than ever is the time to use this report and the other lessons learned reports that we have prepared and other countries have prepared from the last 20 years to better prepare for the future. And that is why I'm here today and why I'm encouraged by your interest and support. So I hope this report becomes more than, I think what it's called in Italian, a lettera morta, a dead letter, but rather gives birth to a better future. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, sir. So we are going to enter our discussion portion of the event. We'd like to thank Ambassador General and Inspector General and Colonel De Magistris for their comments along with other colleagues. And I'd like to set the tone for our discussion where we will invite you to ask some questions, to look forward to incorporating some of the lessons, or ideally many of the lessons that are brought to you today through this guide and through the comments that were shared. Just to sum up a few of the really important points that were made this morning, I'd like only to say that we are here to learn on how to assist police in conflict. What does that look like, and how can we be deliberate in the future in identifying how the NATO community can help to support police that are facing conflict. It's really important, for example, to distinguish between the capabilities of the military and defense establishment with the policing solution. It's one of the underlying lessons of the report. It's also, as Colonel De Magistris just articulated, instability and terrorism can be addressed by policing. Of course, stability policing being one of the key solutions. The use of the military being, needing to be the last resort. And we all need to understand policing. Our entire community that provides security assistance needs to understand policing as a capability of the state to provide protection and to provide security and stability for its people. Therefore, we need to strengthen police to be legitimate actors of protection in the eyes of the community. Those are the key principles that we need to aspire to. So then there are many questions, and I will take the privilege of being the moderator to ask the Inspector General the first question. Before I do that, I will ask you to heed the words of the Colonel and Director of the Stability Policing Center of Excellence, when he said this is not going to be a blaming conference. We are going to be forward-looking. We have the privilege to have some very important findings and very important lessons, and so I encourage you to ask questions that are constructive and that seek to help us as a community to integrate lessons in our toolbox for current and future missions that will be useful and will help us as a community to do things a little bit differently with greater outcomes of stability and success. So, sir, I will ask you the first question, and my question would be please provide us a vision of what the future or present could look like if many of the lessons that this report provides us would be integrated in police assistance. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an excellent question, and I like the fact, let's look forward. Going forward, I could see if you follow the recommendations in this report, as well as some of the other reports that have been issued, the first thing is we prepare for the mission before it starts. And that means creating, and this is my personal opinion, creating that rapid response capability. NATO should create that for police advising and training. And they can call upon the various entities that are represented here today, as well as other government entities from the various governments. But we should think about that, come up with an understanding. And before you go into a country, have those people who are prepared to respond. You don't want to start doing this once you get the mission. You don't want to be in a situation where you're building the airplane as you're flying. And many of the people we talk to, not only about policing, but about all of these capabilities, have said that. I think it was Ambassador Crocker, who was one of the most famous ambassadors we had, who was ambassador in Iraq as well as Afghanistan. He talked about that. He says our problem in the United States in particular is we never prepare for these things. And part of it is because of our bad experience in Vietnam. We said we're never going to do it. And if you look at the new planning by the state and aid and DOD, it starts with the caveat that we're never going to do it again. Well, for heaven's sakes, aren't we starting to do something like this? And it is a slippery slope. Let me just tell you, once you start these things, it starts snowballing. So we may be starting this in various places in Africa right now, and who knows where it's going to end up. You start pouring the money in. Multiple agencies start working, and you haven't really thought it out. So I could see the future is NATO finally resolving the problems, and it's a natural discussion that NATO would have, to have that capability. But we also have to, as my colleague James Cunningham talks about, start to the left before you to start preparing. And hopefully that's what'll happen. That's what I see in the future.
Thank you very much, sir. Does anyone else on the panel want to weigh in? Just give you the opportunity. No? Not this time? Okay. All right, so let me open the floor to all of you to ask questions. There is a microphone or several microphones that will be made available to you. I do encourage the young officers in the back to also ask questions. You are very much a part of this endeavor, especially in the future. So I do encourage you not to be intimidated and to go ahead and ask your questions. They are important. So I think we have a question there, sir.
General, good morning, everybody. I'm Colonel Luigi Bramati. I'm currently serving as a Carabinieri Provincial Commander in Avellino. Planning. You correctly in your report pointed out how Afghanistan mission was affected with regard to the police peace of a lack of a professionalism in conducting training, advising, mentoring, etc. I will imagine how complicated it is to design an entirely from scratch, basically, an internal security architecture. So if damages can be caused by a lack of planning in the execution of a plan, I can imagine how dangerous it is not to plan properly using the proper professionalism. We saw it in Iraq. As you know, my field of expertise lays mostly in Iraq with my research in 2021. But we saw it again in Afghanistan. And there is an additional layer of complexity, the military. The golden hour that you mentioned in your report is very likely up to the military. And very likely the military keep on being relevant for the whole duration of the campaign. And yet, in the planning of the military, there's no word regarding internal security, policing, or police expertise. I had the opportunity to visit Tampa, U.S. Central Command, some years ago. Well, in the U.S. J5, in the J5, there's no military expert. And CENTCOM was dealing with Afghanistan, Iraq, and one of the main legs of these missions were police, right? So my question is, do you think there is a way on how to insert, let's say, your recommendation, your findings, your lessons learned into the planning process, whether military or civilian? Meaning, if your recommendation, your findings become mandatory steps in the planning process, we could achieve an additional benefit. To oblige the decision makers, the political strategic leadership to recognize the relevance of the police peace, something that I think has been lacking in the past year. And second question, do you find a way how to harmonize both the military and the civilian planning process? Honestly, I found my solution for these issues, which is stability policing, but let's be concrete. Given the current state of the doctrine available, the regulation, I'm thinking, for example, to the Stabilization Assistance Review 2018, that, in my opinion, draws a line way too pronounced between the responsibility of the military and the civilians. So you see a way how to harmonize these two processes. I hope the answer is yes, and I hope, because they will give us hope, because we will not incur the mistakes we made in the past in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm thinking, for example, to Ukraine, as you correctly pointed out, that will be our next challenge. Because sooner or later, somebody will have to take into consideration, will have to deal with disputed areas along the border with Russia, sooner or later, for the protection of civilians and to their stabilization. Thank you very much.
You know, thank you very much for a very good question. And my answer is yes. I think it can be done. But part of this is education. And I'm really serious about that. And again, I don't want you to think that we in the United States are, opposed to this use of gendarmerie, of use of the capabilities in this room because of some evil motive. I don't think so. I think it's just sheer ignorance. We don't know who you are. And I think that's why we issued this report. It's now on the file somewhere, and it'll be taught somewhere at a war academy in the United States, and hopefully it'll be taught at academies here in Europe. I think it's critical, and we don't mention this in the report, but you know, when James and his team and other teams have interviewed commanding generals, General Petraeus and General Allen, and I think you all know who they were, four-star generals who led the NATO mission, both of them admitted to our staff they didn't learn about your capabilities in the Carabinieri until after they left Afghanistan. And actually, I think it was General Allen, who was a special advisor to the Secretary of State on defending ISIS, who actually, because he had learned about your capabilities post-Afghanistan, he sought those capabilities, General. I think it was the second battalion. What's it called?
Second Mobile Brigade.
Second Mobile Brigade actually stood up, went to Iraq, and the irony is your brigade ended up in Iraq before General Allen got off the plane. I think you met him on the tarmac. And that is because once people in the United States, and it can't be just the Pentagon, it also has to be our Congress and congressional members have to know of this capability. And I think once they realize, you may overcome that stumbling block right now about support in NATO. But I think as more people learn this, and I was talking to one of your colleagues who works in your foreign ministry about offering our assistance to help training him. And I was encouraged by the fact that I believe the Carabinieri now have staff in the U.S. Embassy, at least your embassy in the United States, and maybe in other embassies. And I hope they can do a good job of educating not only the Pentagon, but educate Congress on this thing. And it's important. I think we should share more information. As an aside, part of the reason I'm here is to learn from you all. And I've been traveling for 10 years to Europe to learn from the Europeans when we were doing our oversight, and that's why I sent my staff here. So I think it can be done, sir. But it's not going to happen overnight. And do not, I think Napoleon always said, do not infer evil motives for what could later basically be explained by incompetency or ignorance. So in our case, I think we are ignorant of your capabilities, and that's why we have not grabbed them and used them.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Thank you, sir. I think it's the answer was quite appropriate for the work that you yourself have done trying to socialize the work of the Carabinieri in the United States. So I think that's important to recognize. Other questions, please. There's sir back here. Oh, okay. You'll be next. Please.
Good afternoon, sir. Is Warrant Officer Agostino Bono, Italian Joint Intelligence Center. First of all, let me thank you for publishing all these comprehensive reports along the years that have been a precious support in our daily job and really helped us to develop a better understanding of Afghanistan. And we are not here, I would like to echo Coral de Magistris' words, we are not here to blame us, but don't you think that one of our failures has been that we should have created a team of experts, and by experts I mean anthropologists, linguists, historians that would have allowed us to develop a better understanding of Afghan tribal dynamics, social dynamics. And one more thing, don't you think that we also fail to understand, in addition to the history of Afghanistan and Afghan legal police system, don't you think that we should have a closer look at the regional context? I worked 4.5 years in Pakistan, and Ambassador Pontecorvo can confirm that, having served as Italian ambassador to Pakistan, I don't think that the Pakistani police or the Indian police, for that matter, performed much better than the Afghans. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for that question, and I agree with you. And we do a poor job of not only lessons learned, but preparing. And I think if you read all of our reports, everyone we talked to said that we did not understand where we were going. I mean, I used to joke until I was corrected by this. I kept saying, you know, we went into Afghanistan thinking it was Norway. And I remember the Norwegian ambassador said, I hope you would stop saying that. But it is. We designed programs like we were contracting in the United States or in Norway. We didn't know there was corruption. So we didn't build in, safeguards for that. We have a lot of experts who knew about Afghanistan, knew about the culture, knew about the corruption, knew about the families. We had intel units who had done excellent work on identifying how this works, and we just ignored them. Part of this is, again, we don't prepare for these operations, and sometimes you can't. A crisis comes up, but you have to respond quickly. But there is ability to prepare. I remember when I worked for Senator Sam Nunn, he was a big, strong supporter in the U.S. Army of FAOs, Foreign Area Officers. I assume most of your military have FAOs or something, where you had officers who were trained to understand a culture of a certain area of the world where they could be sent. I don't even know. I know I see a U.S. officer. I don't know if the FAO program is still in existence. Is it still around? Okay. And that's good. I mean, those are the type of things that I think you can do to prepare. I don't know if there was a FAO foreign area officer who had expertise in Afghanistan, if he was ever consulted. I talked to a lot of Afghan experts in the United States, and most of them were not. And as an aside, I remember so many contractors and so many people, particularly in USAID, who would say, well, we got this great program, it worked in Iraq. Well, Iraq was not Afghanistan. And anyone who thought that just because you had experience in Iraq prepared you for Afghanistan did not understand Iraq or Afghanistan. So you hit a point that's a sore point for us, but I think we should be, and the State Department should be doing that. Your foreign ministry should have that capability. You have people working in these countries in the embassy. Those are the first people you should call in. What was your experience in Pakistan? And I mean, I didn't mean that as an open-ended question, but I'm saying if something happened involving Pakistan, the first people I'd reach out to in Italy would be your Pakistan desk, your Pakistan ambassadors, you, sir, and everyone else who worked there, as well as businessmen and all that. But you got to think that this is important, not just bringing firepower to the table. Okay, that's how my answer. Didn't mean to have you tell us what you did in Pakistan, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
Thank you very much. Sir, we have a gentleman in the green shirt.
Thank you very much. My name is Kamal. I am a former officer of Afghan police. I had the honor of attending this prestigious school in 2005. And in 2019, I became Chief of Staff for the Ministry of Interior. So I can confirm what, sir, you have explained in your report. I had the opportunity of working with 3 different ministers, and police had huge problems. From Afghan perspective, I can just only confirm all what you have discussed in detail here today. But what I witnessed when I became Chief of Staff for the Ministry of Interior, we had some systems like apps system, like Kuraimis, like LATFA managing the Afghan police salary. These were systems that we couldn't manage. We didn't have the capacity to manage these systems. The outsiders, the third parties, and private companies used to manage these resources for us. My question is why these capacity and capabilities were not created within the Ministry of Interior after all these billions spent there. So we couldn't manage them. The other point is we had in our executive level, we had 2 different classes of people. We had the former communists and former mujahideen who fought against each other for 15 years and who opposed each other. They were not getting along. So how we could have a united vision and how we could expect this executive class to lead that kind of situation toward the success. Thank you.
I'm going to call on my colleague, James Cunningham, to maybe add to this. Let me just say, that's an excellent question. And one of the issues, what it hits, and this is the question about we gave or designed all of these systems, and that gentleman is so correct. And it's highlighted in a report that James is finishing up, and it'll be issued sometime in December, about the collapse of the Afghan military, a final report. But one of the key findings is what was driving the train for the United States and for many other countries in Afghanistan were not the reality on the ground, but politics back in Washington. And the politics back in Washington, and this is again the dirty little secret our reports talk about, it is every president, and this again is not meant as criticism, for political reasons, every president wanted to get out of Afghanistan as soon as he got in. So timelines were created that were unrealistic. So going to apps and going to all of these very complex systems, if we have to train the Afghans to use them, then it's going to take a lot longer. So what we're going to do is we're going to substitute for Afghan capabilities. We'll hire contractors from Lockheed or Boeing or whoever who will come in and run the system while we are there, and then we leave. We never focused on sustainability. We never thought that the Afghans have to sustain this equipment, so that means they have to be trained on the equipment and they have to have money to pay for the equipment. So I think in James's report, he highlights the fact that after the withdrawal agreement was signed by Trump, we started pulling the contractors out. So we talked to some of the Afghan senior military and police officials, and they're saying, okay, we know the Americans are leaving. We're trying to get fuel sent to a certain base. We're finally trying to get weapons because they need bullets, they need guns, they need whatever. We can't open up the system to tell us where the weapons are, where the fuel is, where are things, because the contractors had left. And that was a horrible, horrible gift to give to the Afghans. So am I correct on that, James? I mean, he's leaving, so he can say, honestly, I can't fire him now. But that is one of the problems. The problem is we didn't let the situation on the ground dictate our programs, and that applies to the police training. It was a lot faster to train the police to be little Marines, little Army guys, okay? It was a lot, rather than police officers. It was a lot faster to ignore the corruption and just spend more money, and assuming some of it would trickle down to the police. So that is the reason, I think, in my humble opinion. James?
Yeah, sir, thank you. And thank you for that question. So we did release an interim report kind of going over some of these key factors. A final report will be released towards the end of this year. One of the key reasons for these systems being created is we neglected capacity building in Afghanistan in 2002, 2003, 2004. And so when we started looking at human resource management, logistics management, it was 2014, 12 years after we have done it, 12 years without conditions. And so the U.S. government was trying to balance oversight, ghost soldier issues, variety of theft within the system. So how do you do it? We put in technology that within the U.S. government allows us to have oversight. In Afghanistan, it's unsustainable. And as the Inspector General said, it was the worst gift we could give them when our political commitment did not sustain till they were able to take over that capability. So absolutely, I think it's a balancing thing that we need to learn as we go into stabilization operations. How do we improve our oversight, which sometimes is technical, with sustainability and long-term within these host nations? And that balance, unfortunately, while we committed to 20 or 30 years of support through a contract, we left after 2 or 3. So again, we left them with a broken set of tools. The last comment you had about the Mujahideen and other factions kind of working together, I think when it comes down to policing, and just the focus of today's conversation, it doesn't matter if you're a Mujahideen, Russian trained, or American trained. The core principles of protecting society, engaging in community policing, having the police or having the community see you as a value-added investment, all of those principles, regardless of your background, can be implemented. And that's where you can coordinate and cooperate. While you may have different viewpoints politically, your interaction with the local population, your interaction with rule of law, your interaction with providing public safety and security should remain the same, regardless of those affiliations.
Thank you. Any other questions? Sir, we need a microphone. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sir Generals. More than a question, a simple consideration due to the experience in Afghanistan. I believe strongly that the lead of the operation in pre-planning and after in the operational activity must be held by one single entity, without doubts. And all programs made by stakeholders or entities that want to work for the progress of the country, independently UN or whatever, must be embedded in the single plan with clear tasks and objectives. Because if not, one of the problems, I think our Afghan colleague here can witness it, we have a lot of actors in the same theater without a spectacle. Okay? Many ideas, many programs without no coordination, and I remember my experience there, the Afghans watch us like, who must I listen first? Thank you.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I'm looking for our report. I mean, if you actually look at one of our lessons learned report, that's what's one of our main focuses. And I think, James, you helped lead that one, so you may want to add to it. But that was one of our key findings. There was no one person in charge, and that causes confusion. But we have to, like I say, this is a balancing act. You have to balance it also with the fact that there are a lot of bilaterals going on in each country. We cannot ignore the fact, that the United States has objectives, Italy had objectives, everybody had different objectives. But that doesn't mean we don't ignore the problem that causes. We have to try to work around that. So I'd add that.
Sure, I can add to that as well. I think one of the challenges we face is within these international organizations that are supposed to be these coordinating bodies, supposed to be these unifying structures, is they're really designed to maintain cohesion over military operational effectiveness. Again, we will not push our allies to cross any of their red lines. Every deployed unit has a direct chain of command back to their host nation and not to the alliance that's in forward countries. And so there's inherently built into these structures these escape routes for our allies to pursue in a bilateral way or not be forced into something that they're uncomfortable with. And it resulted in the Balkans and in Afghanistan this kind of balkanization of stability operations in which a lead nation takes over a certain part of the country. The reason why that happens oftentimes is those nations need to report back to their parliaments, or for the U.S. to the U.S. Congress and to the people, and to justify why you're there and show progress and show some sort of thing that you created. And that's why a lot of infrastructure is built into stabilization operations. You can go back to your parliaments and say, I built a school, I trained 100 troops. But if you actually create a nested web in which you have a single actor in charge, how do you justify large amounts of deployments, large amounts of spending, when the only return on investment that you can show your parliament or your people is that I sent 10 people to join this larger mission? So again, being able to satisfy the home demand while also operational effectiveness overseas has been a challenge for the NATO and UN and a variety of other organizations over the past 3 decades.
Can I just add one more thing? If you're interested in more detail on that, the report is called Divided Responsibility. It came out in June of 2019, and it highlights that. And can I just add one more thing, and I don't mean to hog the stage here. You know, when I talked about, you know, every president in the United States who went into Afghanistan, you know, immediately wanted to get out, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, that's what politicians do. I mean, the President of the United States has many things on his plate. The President or Prime Minister of every country has to think about other issues. And I keep telling, because I'm always asked questions, especially in Congress, well, should we be in Afghanistan? Shouldn't we be? Should we buy this weapon or shouldn't we? And I keep telling them, I'm an inspector general. I'm neither an inspector nor a general, but I'm an inspector general. And I do process. I don't do policy. Policy are decisions made by your parliament, by your president or your prime minister, or my Congress, and my president. You give me what your goal is, and I can tell you as an inspector general whether you're meeting that goal, and if you keep doing this process, this program, will you eventually, fail or succeed? But ultimately, the decisions made are political, and we have to accept that. It's a political situation. I like to tell people, I teach a lot. As you can tell, I like talking. But, you know, I say inspectors general look at 3 things. Inputs, that's the amount of money being spent. Outputs, that's the amount of boots you buy or kilometers of road you build. And outcomes. Why did you spend the money to buy the boots? Why did you spend the money to buy the airplanes? Why did you spend the money to pay the Afghan police? You had to justify. You had an outcome you wanted to achieve. That is the trickiest thing to measure. We in the U.S. government, and I assume in the Italian government, probably have a difficult time measuring outcome. It's so easy to measure how much money, although I'll be quite blunt with you, when I took over as the SIGAR, we didn't even know how much money we were spending in Afghanistan. That's how bad it was. But we eventually got that settled. We knew how much we were spending and what contracts. But we were just measuring inputs and outputs. Everybody ignored the outcome. And that's what we kept dinging the government with. You said, you know, you want to help women and girls. Okay, Did you accomplish that? You educated them, you gave them money, but, all of them fled, or they, never did anything in the jobs. We built hectares of fields instead of poppies. We wanted to do, well, it turned out that they produced more poppies. In one case, we built canals to help them grow wheat, and they used the canals to grow poppies. So we could do that. So that's the difficult thing, and keep that in mind, particularly of those of you who are, working in a country. Inputs, outputs, and outcomes. Are you meeting the outcome that your parliament has asked you to accomplish? And that's what you should focus on.
Thank you both. And I'd like to highlight, just to follow on what you just said, is, in the report there are several recommendations that either implicitly or explicitly call for the development of assessment, monitoring, and evaluation mechanisms to measure the police assistance effort over time, and then also a call for developing universally accepted measures of effectiveness and performance. So I think that's a really important piece that I've even heard James talk about for many, many years and push forward. I think that's really important, and this report really makes the point. We would have time for one more question. Do I have anyone? Okay, so we'll take two quickly. If you can make your questions quick. Sir, please, and then we'll come to you, sir.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm Colonel SIGAR Cătălin from the Romanian Gendarmerie, former lesson branch head within the NATO NSPCoE, and currently I'm the General Director of Bucharest Gendarmerie. So, as initiator of this project together with James, I will take this opportunity in order to congratulate my former team, both teams in fact, SIGAR and NATO NSPCoE teams, for this huge effort to deliver this report. I have a question for Mr. Sokol and for His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador. Well, reading your findings, your conclusions and recommendations, and based on my personal experience in Afghanistan, I would say that all these findings should be considered not only by the US Congress or US agencies. All these conclusions and recommendations should be considered by our countries, and especially by NATO, UN, and EU as international organizations in charge to provide with international security. So my question is, what shall NATO do in order to properly consider in the future stability policing or civilian police matters? Thank you.
Let me take this very quickly. First of all, a general consideration is you manage to have these kind of reports on this side of the fence. On the other side of the fence, you fall from the 13th floor of your local hospital. And that is the grandeur, the greatness of our system, which learns from its mistakes. I was in NATO, actually, and I was in the lessons learned, the brutal lessons learned exercise which NATO carried forward. And, one of the most brutal was Doug Lute, who, for those who don't know him, is an extraordinary gentleman, was the US Perm Rep in my time in NATO, and became a Perm Rep coming from, what was he, 4-star or 3-star? Well, he was a 4-star general. So, what I heard from Doug Lute was impressive. Coming to stability policing, now I have a soft spot for stability policing because I am a carabinieri. You never were a carabinieri. You always are. You're not serving anymore, but you still are a carabinieri. I was also the guy who, by luck and chance, assisted Mr. Solana, who was at the time the High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy, that's pre-Lisbon, to set up the the police cell and the CFSP and ESDP, it was called at the time. This kind of ghost of European defense which goes around Europe. And I remember that the very first commander was Enzo Coppola. And the other guy was Bruzzese del Pozzo, 2 Carabinieri, 2 on 6 for Carabinieri. Where's the problem with, speaking very frankly, is that within the EU, within the European Union, there are two main different cultures in policing. It's the gendarmerie and the not gendarmerie, I wouldn't know how to call it, model, which needs to find a synthesis. So there's an issue of, when you were talking, that struck me pretty much, because when you were talking about inserting common law principles in a system which works on civil law and religious law and Sharia and all that, it's the same thing when you work about, and you're talking serious things, you're not talking about, a doctrinal dispute. You're talking about the difference between the Bobby on the beat and the Carabiniere. And the difference of the Bobby on the beat and the Carabiniere is a difference in societies. So, it's becoming, if you continue on this road, you become philosophical. You need to have a sense of this. I think it is, and thanks also to the COESPO and to the type of work that you guys are doing, and that everybody else is trying to how can I say, to help on. There is a growing consapevolezza in English. That would be awareness. Thank you, awareness in Italian. Awareness of the fact that the gray area, which is a gray area for the Anglo-Saxons, not what you're saying, John, was absolutely spot on, has to be covered by a police force, which is also a military force, said, simplistically. So I think it takes time, but I think that, I'm not sure that NATO is going to go into crisis management operations anytime soon. I remember, when I got off the plane from Kabul, that's where I was, in Kabul, I got into NATO. It was traumatized. It was a traumatized organization. Then Mr. Putin did everything he could to put us all together again. But still, the crisis management part of NATO I don't think is, going anywhere anytime soon, which gives us time. And last thing, I think that you need to really start working together between NATO and the EU. You can't expect the Americans to do everything. I said publicly, and I was attacked for it, that we have handed over our defense to the US effectively. Mr. Putin changed that too, inshallah, I'd say. Anzi, mashallah, actually, I would say. Let's see if it works. But we really need to have a division of labor between EU and NATO, because we can't afford, overlapping or cosmetic cooperations. And stability policing would be an excellent place to start.
I think the ambassador has summarized. I have nothing else to add. I think that's great. Yeah.
If I may chip in really quickly, His Excellency. Indeed, being a police force with a military status, stability policing really is the police approach to military operation, but it is really just a military capability focused on discharging law enforcement tasks towards the civilians. That's it. And it is already somehow embedded in the NATO defense planning process, to respond to both Katalin and Luigi Bramati. However, there are some friction because of these frictions points between to be addressed by several nations because of their background. This is the point. Finding the synthesis is not easy. However, what we have been telling everybody is that we must consider stability policing as a function not as the actor who performed the function. And stability policing, and then now I'm just addressing it to my fellow directors from the Stability Security Force Assistant and the Military Police Center of Excellence, is indeed an open club where also other forces can be part, not only the gendarmerie type forces. This is also enshrined in the NATO doctrine. However, it is not a matter of relationship within fellow and brothers or sisters in arms. It's a matter of having the nations on board, convinced of this approach. But notwithstanding this, stability policing is indeed a function which can be discharged by several actors within their means and capabilities. The first logical choice, according to the doctrine, I'm looking at Mirek Labecki from the NSPCoE, are the gendarmerie type forces. However, the military police, the military, I was talking to somebody from the Italian Navy beforehand, the Marines or the Navy can be part of this club indeed.
Hey, Nadia, can I just jump in real quick?
Of course.
First, I want to personally thank Catalin for 5 years ago walking up to me after my first speech, which kind of started this relationship. But getting to the point about NATO, what steps it can take, I think the first step is look at the tools it used in Afghanistan. Counterinsurgency was one of them. The counterinsurgency doctrine, which still says that the international intervening forces needs to bring the police and population together, regardless how predatory the police is still on the books. It is still U.S. doctrine. It is still NATO doctrine. I had talked to the two founding fathers of the U.S. counterinsurgency doctrine, both Dr. Nagel and General Petraeus. They both said that there are issues with the current doctrine, but unfortunately no one has taken time to actually review the current doctrine and make changes based off of lessons learned. And then the next one is what are tools we did not use? And I think that's where we look at the stability police concept and we look at a variety of other tools. But there needs to be an examination to make sure that when we go into another conflict, that we're not just pulling broken tools out that we used in previous conflicts and using them again. I had pulled reports from the U.S. experience in Korea, Vietnam, and elsewhere, and I could tell you that I could probably remove Korea and Vietnam and supplant it with Iraq and Afghanistan, and we use the same processes. And the reason why is after the conflict's over, we try to move on versus re-examining the tools we use and actually making modifications so when we do visit crisis in the future, we're actually better prepared to go in.
Thank you very much. We have one question. Yep. Go ahead.
This is Atasay Rongun from Turkish Embassy. I'd like to thank you and your team for the old reports. I spent 2 years in Afghanistan in 2019 and 21, so in this time period I frequently look at your reports for various reasons. And I would like to thank the Carabinieri for hosting us here for this event. My question is about you have mentioned establishing the rule of law and building community policing is based on various elements. I think the most important one is trust, building the trust between people and the police, AMP. And this trust can be built with ethnicity as well. I mean, it's a very, very important element in Afghanistan. People like to see someone from their community in police in order to have this social contract between AMP and the people. So do you believe the people, the various ethnicities were well represented in the academy? Have you checked these numbers? I'm sorry if I have missed it in the report, but I haven't seen it. So I would like to get your idea about this as well. And my one suggestion would be, you have pointed out that the police advisors should be trained in advance before they come to the theaters, let's say in Afghanistan. So they can learn about the customary law, religious law, etc., the values of the people. So I believe every ally, every nation in NATO have different skill sets, different tools, different backgrounds. I believe these should also be considered. I mean, thank you for your reference for Turkey, that we have been training the Afghan police since 1920s. And I believe we could have played more role if it was, given to Turkey. Thank you very much.
I'll have to defer to James about the question about the number of various subgroups and subnationalities and how they were represented. But I think you're absolutely correct, and this is my personal opinion. No, it's not in the report, but I think we underutilized Turkey. I think we underutilized a lot of our allies. I think it was a big mistake. As you and I have been talking offline, I mean, for some reason, whatever it was, security or whatever, every time I said I wanted to go out with the Turkish military or the Turkish police or visit the Turks, I was always told I couldn't. And it was for security reasons. I don't know. I'm not saying bad motives, but I think it was a mistake. And actually, I'd like to resolve that to some extent. I'd love to. We can arrange, maybe through your embassy in Washington, my staff sitting down and learning from the Turks. What did the Turks see? What did they hear? What did they learn? And how would they do it differently again? And I told my staff to do that. We've sent teams to Germany, to England, to Italy, you name it, the Nordics. What did you see? What did you do? What did you learn? And we tried to do that because there is a tendency, maybe it's every country has this, we have a tendency to think only bright ideas come from the Pentagon or the State Department or USAID, and they don't. I mean, I think open enough to realize my ignorance, and so I early on wanted to find out what were the rest of the countries doing. Accordingly, we have been asked back by all of these countries to brief them on our reports. So there's a flow of information. Actually, unfortunately, there's a better flow of information between us and our European allies than with us and some of our U.S. government agencies right now. We have been asked to brief more European countries than European agencies, I should say, than U.S. agencies about this report and other reports. And I think that's a waste. But I think what happens is everybody's focusing on the current crisis. So we're not going to do Afghanistan again, remember that. And that's what I think is driving the train, and I think it's mistaken.
Before we go to the serious answer, I'll answer you. And I'll answer you as I preface by saying that I'm retired since, so I can speak my mind. I actually spoke my mind also before, which is why I ended up in Afghanistan rather than elsewhere, but that's okay. That was my choice. Also because the first time my personal history is very much tied with Afghanistan. The first time I set foot in Afghanistan, I was 3 years old, so I ended my career there. The truth of the matter, Dasai, is now we said, you know it, you were in Kabul with me, we were very close friends, and thank God for the Turks, because you had to know something, what's going on, you went to the Turks. The truth of the matter is, we are American bashing. The Americans bash themselves. We all went into Afghanistan, not for the Afghans. We went to show the Americans that we were good allies. That's the bottom line. And then developed the thing, not as a serious military. I worked for a number of years in security. And I worked for a number of years, with the military. I had 3 defense ministers in my time as diplomatic advisors. And there was this frustration between the military and the civilians, the military who wanted to go and do a serious military job, and the civilians who were telling all of us, we went there to show them. That Afghanistan is America. It's an American problem. Yeah, but you're there too. In the end, when President Trump takes the wrong decision and thinks that he'll get a couple of percentage points by pulling the boys out before, the end of then what can you say? Because you have subcontracted whatever your presence is in Afghanistan to the U.S. And that also explains why, last thing I'll say before we go back to, as I say, to the serious. Together with Zal Khalilzad, Zal helped a lot to get a consultation, I'm not saying anything serious here, between the new Biden administration and the North Atlantic Council. We had Jake O'Sullivan's deputy 3 times. You were there too. Plus State, Department of Defense, online, 2 hours with the NATO ambassador 3 times, not once, 3 times, asking for suggestions. No suggestion was, except for, the basic, which was, conditions-based withdrawal rather than time-based withdrawal, but we all knew that was going nowhere. There wasn't really, any type of, with maybe the notable exception of your own perm rep, who had been in Afghanistan and knew it, no real proposals to help the Americans make the right decision. So, in the end, the responsibility was mainly American because they took the decision, but the rest of us, kind of accompanied them along the wrong path for 20 years.
To answer some of your questions about the model in which we use for some of the police forces in Afghanistan, I think the answer is complex, right? And so I think that's the problem. When we look retrospectively back at Afghanistan, we said we could have done this, and it actually would have transpired into a different success story. And I'm not sure if that's the case. When we went into Afghanistan, policing was being done by militias who were local to that territory, who were abusing their own people in their own territory, in their own parts of society. When we came in, we had this philosophy that you need to take these local militias out of their local area and put them into a different area where they may not have that relationship or oppressive relationship with the society. And of course, that didn't work either. So I wouldn't say necessarily if we had that local-based capability. Now, as we were developing a police force from scratch, that professionalization could have been more localized, where you're actually leveraging linguistic similarities. For example, having Farsi speakers down the south did not work when you're engaging local population. But again, that early initiation, I do not believe keeping them local would have allowed us to remove that factional influence and militia influence that was permeating society. I 100% agree with the Inspector General. We did not leverage Turkey. Turkey had a long-standing relationship, and the Afghans built their legal code largely around Turkish books. Why didn't we leverage that background that we had available to us in the very beginning? I think that was a misstep dramatically. But when you come down to trust, I think one of the things we failed at is we did not create a new social contract between the population and the police. We never exposed the population to the reforms we were attempting to put into the police. And I think any well-developed society realizes that one of the oversight mechanisms of a police force is the local population. When the police go too far, the locals realize that they have violated some sort of trust principle and uprise against it, riots or whatever you see from that. We never exposed the police and the population together. And we've done that in Africa a little bit recently over the years to try to build that trust, where we actually bring the society into the training facility and show them what we're training the police on. What are the expectations that they should have with the police force? What are the guidelines and procedures the police are supposed to be implementing with you as a civilian? And if they're not, we're creating some sort of mechanism that you can call the police out and have some sort of oversight. But you need to build trust, not by closing off society from your training program, but by actually bringing society into the training program where they can actually understand all of the reforms and professional training that you're providing, because excluding them when the police go back into society and continue their oppressive behavior, not only do the local population not realize what they're supposed to be doing differently, but they also now think that the international community has now sanctioned that activity, because they just came out of an international training class. And so how do we manage that trust relationship, not only between the police and the population, but also the erosion of that trust we as international actors have with the population when it assumes that we are sanctioning such horrible activity by the police after they've gone through our program.
Further comments? Yes, sir. Okay, yes, please, sir.
So thank you very much. I will be very brief. Thank you very much for being here. And I have to apologize because of my delay, but generals are very good in finding excuses, but this one is a real good one. We had a visit at the Carabinieri quarters of the Ministry of Defense, which is outgoing, so he was pleased to pay a visit to the headquarters that I couldn't miss. But I understood the importance of this conference, and I totally agree with the outcomes and with that we gathered in this toolbox that we hopefully we will somehow exploit it one day or the other. I wish the soonest, but talking about wishes, I have one wish that we have, different nationalities present in this room, and we are pushing, as you know, on the concept of stability policing, and I think that everybody agrees on the issue that while military forces are mainly focused on the opponents or enemies or the insurgents, police is mainly focused on population because they are trained and they are accustomed to deal with the population, with the citizens. So we need to match these two capabilities to realize synergies, and that's why we are willing that starting from NATO, we are trying in Europe, but as Ambassador Pontecorvo, ciao Stefano, said, there is even in Europe you have different approaches on policing, the way of policing, and gendarmerie forces are not always politically sexy, I would say, especially in many countries. So my wish is that NATO could have this concept, because we elaborated the doctrine, approved at strategic level, because saying that it is an issue of tactical level, it's a misunderstanding and the wrong approach to the issue, because if we say that we have to merge the different capabilities, the military capabilities of our brothers of the Army and Air Force and Navy, of course, but mainly on the ground of the Army, and the police capabilities of gendarmerie type of forces, of even well-trained military police forces, we do not want to build up walls between the kind of forces. It's a matter of capabilities that you can deploy. Once we merge this, I think that we can move forward to accomplishing a better accomplishing of the mission. So this is not a question, it's just my personal wish, and I hope that everybody can pass this to the embassies, or because this is, I guess, I read very quickly your points. I totally agree with the studies, very detailed studies you elaborated, but the bottom line is that we need to have a different approach to these operations, or it will keep going and making mistakes all the time. Very expensive mistakes, also because we have lives of our, people deployed on the ground, civilians, and we will never come up with something which really changes the approach to these kind of operations. And thank you very much for being in Rome and to the Carabinieri School. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Just to chip in on this question, the last one. The Stability Policing Center of Excellence, along with the NATO Security Force Assistance Center of Excellence, are providing the only training solution on institutional advisor upon a request from the Italian Minister of Defense. So there is a seminar which is held twice a year, which is available for anybody in the alliance and partner countries. The next one will be held most likely in June, and it is the only training solution to educate institutional advisor on both security force assistance, which is one of the three pillars of the security sector reform, and on stability policing. So there is something, and we are somehow the precursor of this training requirement. And the social contract, the main means to implement the social contract is community-oriented policing, la polizia di prossimità in Italia. The closer we are to the local population, the better we can support them, we can assist them, and we can win the battle of narratives, which is crucial. It's one of the main battles, but the battle of narratives is crucial to win hearts and minds and to legitimate the local institutions. We are part of the solution, we are not the solution indeed, but we can contribute to long-term peace and stability and development.
Thank you. Do we have any other question? We're coming to the end, but I want to make sure we accommodate and hear from everyone who wants to speak. No? Okay. So I'm going to close by, sort of summing up the idea that, from those lessons with a, common plea from all of us to learn those lessons and integrate them in the future. We need to, really remember that police assistance is about installing professionalism and promoting professionalism of the police, and that really starts with the relationship of the police and the use of force, which is very different than the military. And of course, with the need for police to understand how to operate within the respect of the rule of law. As I hear in our conversation here that, there needs to be the allies within the NATO alliance need to listen to each other, get educated about each other's capabilities, and potentially leverage various capabilities that may be well suited for a particular conflict. And as has been said, understanding the context and adapting strategies to the context are key. And then looking at the tools that we have as a community and understanding how they're suited are some of the key points here that have been discussed. I would like to thank you all for the questions, for the work that you've done towards police assistance. And before we close, I would like to recognize James Cunningham, who has been a pillar in all of this work. And who has had the courage to really articulate the findings as they are for many years here in this school, in Vicenza, and in many other places. So it has been an honor, and you have really made significant contributions. And so the entire community thanks you, as we can attest. So thanks, James. I don't know if you want to say a few words, but you're welcome to.
It will be a few words. I am in between you all and lunch, as the IG has noted. Again, it's been an honor and a pleasure to have worked with most, if not all of you, on this important topic. It was, again, it was Catalin who started it all. So I know you guys are mentioning me, but if it wasn't for him coming up to me at the end of my first presentation and said, "How are Americans so honest in public?" was the initial start. We probably wouldn't be here today. So I appreciate all the support and help over the years with the NATO Stability Police Center of Excellence, and again to the Inspector General for allowing us to actually come forward to Europe on the government's dime to engage with the Carabinieri and other NATO gendarmerie forces to actually take this forward and result in a great product by both teams. So it's been an honor, it's been a pleasure to meet all of you all, build some great professional friendships and relationships, and it has been an honor truly to have been part of this.
And I just can't help but echo the ambassador's words about, the strength of our countries and how much they are willing to evaluate and learn, as you put it, criticize in a way that, is productive and constructive. So I think that those are great words to remember as we move forward. So thank you, all of you, for the significant contributions. Thank you, IG of SIGAR, for all the work that and the contributions. And so I think that now we'll close this conference. Thanks to all of you for being here. And I believe we will no longer stand between you and lunch. And so this conference is closed. Thank you very much.
Okay, just a second before closing. I believe that also our last moderator deserves an applause from us all for your work. So please do not hesitate to reach the name